Well, hello and welcome. And thanks for joining for this week's panel conversation. I'm really happy that you're here. My name is Matt Fulton, and I'm the Vice President for National Engagement with a company called Polco. We work with communities around helping build engagement practices and tracking performance. And we are happy to have an excellent panel today to discuss the topic, maintaining a sense of community in a socially distanced world. We're going to be talking about the challenges that community leaders are facing right now in connecting with their residents during a pandemic and all of the other things that are impacting our communities, and what steps they're taking, what actions, what creative solutions they have found to help engage with their residents in a meaningful way so that they're engaging in a safe and effective way during these challenging times. The whole intent of these conversations is really to gather perspectives from government leaders and then share them with other people who are contending with the same issue. So it really becomes a positive way to learn from others and take advantage of things that have already been proven to work in other communities. Here's the format for today. We'll take a few minutes to get to know each of the panelists and do a little bit of introduction. And then I'll kick off the conversation about what we're really focusing in on today and what it takes to maintain a sense of community in this kind of weird time that we're all living through. And then once the questions are done, we'll provide a little bit of an opportunity for some engagement between the panelists and then wrap it up towards the end. But if that sounds okay, I think we'll get the program underway. Let me introduce our first panelist. It's Peter Auger, who's been the city manager in Novi, Michigan since 2014. Although Peter has been around in the public sector for almost 30 years, including time in the U.S. Army. Peter is a past president of the Michigan City County Management Association and has provided other types of leadership for the Michigan Municipal League. He has a master's degree in public administration and is also a graduate of the Gettysburg Leadership Institute. Peter, which I think is just absolutely great. I've just heard great things about that program. Pete has also gone through the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard and the executive program there. He's a credential manager with ICMA and has been very involved with ICMA activities, which I really, really value. He credits much of his leadership experience on team building back to the basics of team sports, playing college and semi-professional football and international basketball representing the Army. I'm really intrigued about that, Peter. And if you wouldn't mind, I'd love for you to share just a little bit more about your background.
I've lived a very sheltered, boring life. Actually, I didn't know anything about city management growing up. And I just kind of stumbled in it. My first career was actually in law enforcement. When I was in the military, I was in the military police corps and then joined law enforcement after getting my bachelor's degree. So I just thought government could be run a lot better. And what I found was there's a lot of different rules and regulations that I was unaware of. And it's funny we're talking about communication is because what I found is we could communicate better, and not only to the public, but to our staffs and our teams that we're having do things. I had no idea what the clerk's office did or what the community development office did or anything. I was just a police officer and everything revolved around that. So once I got into operational side of government or governance, it really helped me understand where I could make improvements and where I could make an impact. And as they say, the rest is history.
That's great. Really appreciate you being here. And you do bring with you a really varied background. So I'm really looking forward to hearing your perspectives. I'm happy to introduce our second panelist, who's actually my nephew, Adam Fulton. Adam is the Deputy Director for Planning and Economic Development in the city of Duluth, Minnesota, where he's been for the past 5 or so years. In his job, he's providing operational oversight over planning and zoning, economic development, federal programs, things dealing with housing. And he also provides staff oversight for the Duluth 1200 Fund, which I'm intrigued to learn a little bit more about. It's an affiliated independent nonprofit group providing economic development funding for new business in Duluth and job creation in Duluth. Adam serves on the board of directors for the Duluth Greater Downtown Council. And before arriving in Duluth, Adam has served in a couple of different communities, generally in the same category of community development and economic development. Adam's got an environmental degree as well as a master's degree in urban and regional planning from the University of Minnesota. Adam, if you wouldn't mind, well, first of all, thank you for taking the time to be here. Really appreciate it. But if you wouldn't mind just sharing a little bit more about your background.
Well, yeah, thanks, Matt. Yeah, really happy to be here, and excited to have an opportunity to discuss this fairly complicated topic of engagement during the pandemic. It's a challenge for all of us, and in Duluth, certainly no different than anywhere else, probably in the world. We are, I think, in a good position in Duluth. We finished up adoption of a new comprehensive plan just about 2 years ago, and so we were pretty well positioned to understand just sort of the broad policy priorities as we get into this. But I've been happy to be part of a city government that values our level of communication with our citizens. That's really a very high priority for us here in Duluth. And yet understanding that we've got some unique constraints. Duluth is a city that is about 26 miles long, and it's pretty narrow, only 4 miles wide at its widest. And so we have a unique geographic constraint that if we hadn't done a whole bunch of process stuff in advance with the policy, we would not be well positioned to be able to communicate with the public here in Duluth otherwise. But I've valued it. I really enjoy working here. Duluth is a really neat community located in northern Minnesota. We're the northernmost point of Interstate 35 in the United States. So you can travel there all the way down to Texas on I-35. It's a really fun community to work in. And I think, I'm interested to hear the experiences in other states today because, I've spent most of my career in the state of Minnesota, and we work closely with Wisconsin and some with the Dakotas. But it is a area where, I think there are big differences happening between states. And where we're doing something in one way in Minnesota might be done a little bit different in other states, and certainly an opportunity to learn from both Michigan and Texas today. So thanks for having me.
That's great, Adam. Literally, this panel is connected, right? It can be by an interstate, but we're in a connected world. Our third panelist is Opal Mauldin-Jones. Really happy that Opal's joining us. She's the city manager in Lancaster, Texas. She was appointed in 2011, although she has been associated with the city since 2003. Under her leadership, one of the cool things is that Lancaster was selected as an All-American city back in 2019, which I think is just an outstanding accomplishment. She currently serves on the Texas City Manager Board of Directors, the Best Southwest Partnership Board of Directors, and the North Texas Commission Board of Directors. So a very active woman. She's received really cool stuff. She's received numerous awards and recognitions throughout her career. She was named Outstanding Texan for the State District 109 by the Texas Legislative Black Caucus. And she received the ELGL Traeger Award, which recognizes top influencers in local government. She's also recently recognized by the Municipal World magazine as a 2020 Woman of Influence in Local Government. Nice to see, Opal, that you're also an active member in ICMA, and specifically with the ICMA International Committee, which I used to chair a number of years ago. So I really appreciate the fact that you're involved with that. Opal is a graduate of the Harvard program as well, like Pete, as well as the Senior Executive Institute at the University of Virginia. Opal, thank you for taking the time to be here, and would love to hear a little bit more about your background.
Thank you, Matt. I'm really happy to be here, but you've shared quite a bit, because other than all of that, I'm a mother and a wife. So really happy and proud of my 3 children, with the oldest being 24 and the youngest being 14. So kind of a little span there, but I'm also working on my degree in theology. So I'm attending Dallas Theological Seminary in my spare time, right? So really happy to be here and share. And I love the fact that we're all connected with Interstate 35. That's great that it literally goes all the way down. So looking forward to sharing.
Yeah, glad you're here. And thanks to all of you for being here. Well, I tell you what, let's kick into the topic. The topic today is maintaining a sense of community in a socially distanced world. just given the total disruption that we've all been experiencing over the past year, it really kind of calls into question, how are you able to connect your residents and keep your residents engaged on the things that impact them on a daily basis, as specifically focusing in on maintaining that sense of community that is so important for communities to be successful. I think we all appreciate that authentic communication has to be a two-way approach, and being able to help residents understand what the issues are that are impacting them, as well as to be a good listener and understand what they value and what your stakeholders feel that are important for moving the community forward. The pandemic just creates so many different challenges that that community leaders need to contend with. And let me just kind of focus in on just a little bit of that. Even before the pandemic or any of the community unrest, engagement was always hard. I mean, Adam, I'm thinking of your comp planning process and the number of people that probably attended some of those meetings. Generally, we have found that engagement barriers have really caused difficulties in getting engagement going in the best of times. We do know that 80% of adults in America have never even connected or attended a city council meeting. So, that makes sense. People's lives are busy. The timing of meetings create barriers. There's all sorts of reasons why it's difficult for us to accomplish successful engagement. But then you lay on top of that a pandemic where people are now trying to maintain a job while they're working virtually and they're homeschooling their kids. And at the same time, you're trying to deal with a virtual organization and all of your meetings being virtual and bringing in all the technology. And then to lay on top of that, all of the political divisions that are causing stress and challenges in all of our communities. It just makes it really, really difficult. So the value of this conversation is really to learn a little bit about how do you engage your residents and what steps have you taken to bring your residents into the conversation and to hear them in an authentic and meaningful way so that they are able to maintain that sense of community. There are three questions that we're going to be posing to our panelists today. The first question is, how has your communication and engagement strategy evolved since the beginning of the pandemic? How does resident engagement influence your success in maintaining a sense of community? And then finally, the question is, which tools do you currently use to measure feedback from a resident's perspective during these challenging times? And I would love to start with you, Pete, on this question. Can you talk a little bit about how Novi's communication and engagement strategy has evolved since the start of the pandemic?
Well, thanks, Matt. Well, I've been fortunate enough and really blessed that I've got a great team, both on our IT side and our communications team. And so we already had a very robust communication process set up. But what's really changed is I found out that we really, on our internal team, had a challenge that we thought we were racing to be first with the information. Because our communication team is so good, we're always out there leading the way in the region with information. Our social platforming is some of the best out there that I've seen as far as communities go. We actually took our video programming in-house. We dissolved a 30-year partnership with a couple neighboring communities. In the first year they were up and running, they actually won an Emmy. So, I mean, that's how creative our team is in challenging and doing things different than normal, the status quo. But we had a couple of regional incidents before going into the pandemic, and other community members would hit our websites, our Facebook page, check out what we were saying to get the information, not their own communities, because it was clear, it was concise, and it was consistent. And I think that was very important. When the pandemic hit, I found that some of our department directors thought we had to be first out there with the information. And the goal was never to be first with the information, but it was to have the correct information. And this was huge during the pandemic because you had the EDC saying something, you had the federal government saying something a little bit different, you had state governments saying something even other different, and then down to at our level in Michigan, you had the county health department saying something that was contradictory, and all of them wanted us to enforce their rules. So it was important for us, and we had to pull back, because that's when I realized, I said, well, why did you rush that message out? Because we were being first. And the goal is not to be first. The goal is to have factual, correct, consistent information all the way along the line. And that was a good lesson for me to learn, because I just took that for granted, that we were always that way, but people were racing to get the information out because it just came across, almost like the ticker tape of the old days. You younger folks on the call here might have to Google that. But it's like, okay, it came across. Let's get it out. We had to confirm and reconfirm and check, where this is coming from. How's it marry up to other things we're hearing and other things the other agencies are saying, because we didn't want to be the contradictor of those messages. We just wanted to get the best information out. I don't know if that covered that question, but that was the biggest challenge, I think, is making, kind of pivoting just a little bit, because we already had great platforms out there.
Let me ask you a question. Novi has always had such a great reputation and is so well respected in the business about management and how you're handling. And so when you talk about your communication team being robust and active, I always talk about the value of having engagement in place prior to any kind of a challenge arising. Can you talk about how that has impacted, or how that plays into Novi's experience?
I couldn't agree, Matt, more with what you just said. It is so proper, so essential to have the proper planning in place. That's why we do drills. That's why we do emergency management drills all the time. That's why during leadership meetings we talk about what if this happens, because you have to get it in somebody's mindset, not always planning for the worst, but planning to be the best. In doing that, and I'll go one step before that, is you have to hire the right people, and you have to hire character people that you can count on, where the rubber hits the road, and when things go sideways, that they're not going to go sideways. They're going to be there. They're consistent. They're making the right decision at the right time, for the right reason. Doesn't mean we're always right in those decisions, but based on the information that people have. So if you put the good people, you're the best people at what they do in the right positions, it makes my job, and it's all selfish, because it makes my job a lot easier when those things are lined up prior to something happening, and then things start taking care of themselves, and you have to build a team across disciplines as well, so they trust each other.
Yeah, that's so true. Thanks, Pete. Adam, could you share how your communication and engagement strategy has evolved over the past year?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I think it was great to hear Pete talk a little bit about the communication. Duluth is an old city. We don't use ticker tape, although that's kind of a, certainly a recognizable thing. So at the start of the pandemic for us, I think it was a need to handle that information flow. And we had the very fortunate opportunity to do some close coordination with our county government here, which is the headquarters are in Duluth. And so we conducted shared joint press conferences, making sure the information was happening in a consistent format, making sure it was getting pushed out in multiple ways. We relied on traditional media, and it was a confusing process because we didn't know exactly what was happening. We actually were in a process of, hey, well, we're going to stay open. And then all of a sudden making a determination that, no, we're going to close and we're going to have our city facility closed and try to shift our operations to be able to react to that. And so, broadly speaking, we weren't really ready to shift to fully remote operations, but we were faced with a basically 3-day period where we needed to shift our operations, get staff prepared to work remotely, and change how we conduct our policy initiatives that are ongoing. In my department, we manage about 40 people, and we are responsible for construction services, all the building permits and inspections, as well as all of our planning policy stuff. And we work very closely with our Strong Mayor system to make sure our policy initiatives are advancing. The pandemic just ground our policy initiatives to a halt. We said, number one, we're not prepared to do the right kind of community engagement. We were in the midst of a very important dialogue on dealing with vacation rental units. sensitive topic. Duluth's a tourism town. We have about 6.5 million visitors a year. And so there's a tough policy issue where essentially we were delayed immediately. And we're just getting back to it a year later. But we're also faced with, because we're an older city, we have fairly specific procurement processes in place. And so we had an agreement with Cisco, and we're relying on WebEx. And so that's what we got into. And WebEx is one of the technologies that a lot of us have become more familiar with during this process. It's a good, secure product, but the learning curve was immense. And all of a sudden, our department staffs 12 boards and commissions for our city. And so all of a sudden we're shifting all of that to an electronic format. It was a very bumpy process, and it took a lot of time. Because Duluth is so long, geographically really spread out, we have very good internet access in some parts of our city, and then there's distant neighborhoods that where I sit today in my attic here in the central part of the city, that are 13, 14 miles in another direction, and there is not good internet in that area. And so we have to cope with that. And we have, I think, come a long way. But one of the aspects to our procurement process, we were kind of locked into that WebEx product, and it didn't have a call-in feature initially. And so for people who don't have good access to the internet, to then also say to them, well, there's also no way for you to call in using your phone. It's a challenge, and it poses a real dilemma for us as we've tried to initiate some of the things that, under Minnesota state law, we can conduct all our meetings virtually. And that is what we have done since last March. But it's a tricky process.
Hey, Adam, how did you deal with all of your building inspections during all of those inspections, right, all of those kinds of things? How did you deal with that? And any tips that you found to be really helpful?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, Matt. I think our building inspections in the state of Minnesota were set. The Department of Labor here in Minnesota said, you may not cease doing building inspections. Projects have to keep going. You have to keep inspecting them and just figure it out. So, our biggest priority was making sure our inspectors in the field had adequate access to protective equipment, making sure they could conduct those inspections safely. We initiated guidance to all the active contractors in the city to say, this is our expectations for you on your job sites as to how you're going to be doing the testing, to be making sure social distancing is in place. We also rolled some of our inspections processes into a FaceTime process. Our inspectors all have to carry iPhones, so they have data access in the field for our systems. And there are inspections where we allowed the inspections to go forward using FaceTime, which is a big leap in technology. But it allowed us to continue and have operations. In a normal year in Duluth, we'll do about $200 million in construction. And it just so happens that this year, we're doing about $350 million in construction. So it's really high levels of work. And making sure that those construction projects can stay on track hasn't been simple. I want to really applaud our inspection staff because they've worked hard and they've been faced with a lot of exposures to COVID. The reality is they've been on job sites more or less continuously where they get a call the next day and they say, well, one of our workers here has been diagnosed. Well, that means that inspector is now working remote. And so that's where those FaceTime inspections become critical because if they're working remote for 2 weeks, they can still do some of their work.
Yeah. And where broadband becomes really important.
Oh, just critical. Yeah.
Thanks, Adam. Opal, how has Lancaster's communication and engagement strategy evolved over the last year?
And Pete and Adam have both touched on so many of the same things that we've actually been doing. Some of the challenges we experienced are, as Adam was saying, access. Broadband is, we're inside the DFW metropolitan area, but we're a small, big city or a big, small city because we're 50% of my community is undeveloped. So there's still a lot of rural area in the community. And so access was a really big challenge. So initially, when everything basically shut down, the good thing we had going for us is that we were still doing a lot of things the old-fashioned way. So we still had a print communication piece that we sent out to our residents. And so we were literally still utilizing that. Our ISD partnership was invaluable to us because our independent school district has a phone system, a phone tree where they literally call almost every household that has a student. in the household. And with such a young population, with a lot of kids in the system, we were able to utilize that relationship so we could get information out to the households through those phone calls. Pete is correct. We had the feds, you had the state, you had the county, and then the city. So not being the first to get information out, but trying to make sure where do we fit into that process to getting information out and making sure it's right was really critical for us. And so we tried to take it slow, but yet be timely with that communication. So we also utilized our reverse 911. We have a code red system that allows us, with everyone that is registered with our system, to be able to contact those individuals by phone. With everyone being home, the phone and access to through the internet being somewhat of a challenge, utilizing those telecommunication systems and opportunities really became critical for us to utilize as a part of that. In Texas, before the churches ended up being closed, the churches were initially a very good way for us to get information and communication out, because folks were really truly relying upon their faith. And those institutions were still open and having their services initially. So we were able to share information through our faith-based community, through the ministerial alliances and other relationships, to make sure we were able to get information out that way. And so what I found through this is that there was no one, while we may have put a lot of eggs in a particular basket prior to COVID, we literally had to deploy and utilize all of those resources or all those tools in our toolbox to make sure we were leaving no one untouched, which became really critical and valuable for us.
It is really cool to hear how you really took advantage of your community partners, like schools, your churches. I'm kind of curious, because you're in the metro area, your regional associations, which become so important on messaging, like Pete had talked about, did you have strong relationships with those groups prior to entering into the pandemic? Did that help, or did you have to establish relationships in order to get a unified message out? Can you talk about the importance of that?
So no, we actually had all of those relationships in place prior to the pandemic. And more than anything, I appreciate, sometimes all those meetings come up on that calendar, and prior to COVID, you were constantly going, or at one meeting or the other. But when this pandemic hit, those established relationships were absolutely invaluable, because we have the ability, you didn't have to pick up a phone and try to introduce yourself to someone or plan a meeting. Our regional COG was able to send out a mass email, and everybody was on a Zoom meeting, and it wasn't about, let's do introductions. Everyone was catching up and going, okay, hi. And it was an opportunity to say, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? And then make it more of a regional approach. Dallas-Fort Worth is pretty big. So you kind of had the western part of the Metroplex, you had the northern part of the Metroplex, the east, and then kind of the southern and the central. But having all of those individuals, those mayors, city managers collectively on a call, the county judges, and having that dialogue was absolutely invaluable. We literally were having weekly meetings. As it's progressed, we're finally now down to twice a month. But at the onset of this, we literally were having a weekly call, just where we talked about those very things, so that it wasn't one community literally next door to you is doing something completely different or messaging completely different. We all were able to rely upon one another. And in some instances, our residents may have been getting information because I-35 literally is my western city limit. And so the community on the west side of 35, residents don't always know what their boundaries are. And so information was easily accessible and shared. And it was the same message because of those relationships.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That's really exciting. And congratulations on having those relationships established, because it does make a big, big difference. Thank you. Adam, let's move on to the second question. How do you think engagement influences Duluth's sense of community?
Well, it's been really critical, and I would say, it's fun to hear Opal talk a little bit about those partnerships that were in place. As I said, we had the right partnerships in place for the messaging, but one of our policy initiatives had been an outreach effort with our independent school district and with our county on something that was going to help us coordinate around equity issues, and so that that fell flat. We don't have that, and we're still kind of working on trying to get that in place. Um, when we are doing engagement in Duluth, we prioritize it. We try to meet people where they are. We go out to events, and so it really is a face-to-face thing. It is intended to be something where we are out in the community, working closely with people. And so shifting it to a virtual environment's been tricky. And I'd say, we have valued the ability to use electronic tools, using, software like we're using today with Zoom, or as we use WebEx, has been useful, but it's probably a little bit insufficient. And that's one of the things that we recognize, and we've tried to redouble our efforts to make sure we are still, achieving what the community is trying to get at for participation in different events. We were in the midst of something. We had a contract out to deal with one of our downtown streets. It was going to be a reconstruction of this street, reconfiguration, going from a two-way street to a one-way street. It travels through our downtown and through a couple neighborhoods. And as we got into it, it was a question of how do we do all that outreach? And whereas in the past, we might have done something that, some community meetings, we might have gone and met people in our downtown at meetings that they were having anyway, we had to figure out how do we deal with this in an electronic situation. And what that ended up looking like is meetings multiple times per day so that we could catch people when they were available, because everybody's schedule is a little confused due to what we're dealing with. And then we didn't have, one or two meetings. We ended up having like 6 meetings. So it's 6 meetings. Our staff are having to put more time into this, having more personal conversations, smaller conversations, ends up with a little bit of redundancy for the part of staff as they go through this. But the reality is that redundancy has become increasingly important so that we can make sure people have the opportunity to have a voice and have a dialogue with the rest of the community. It's not something where we quite see the light at the end of the tunnel. Having City Hall closed means that, we don't have the ability to gather. We have really limited our access to City Hall as a distancing measure. So when we are doing things now, it's trying to get communication out, whether that's through, postings and really relying as much as we can on our electronic tools. I heard Pete mention, I think, getting some of the social media pieces out there. We're trying to stream whenever we can meetings that are just on Facebook. And one of the things we're seeing with this that's really interesting is that while we are acknowledging and trying to build in the challenge that we face around missing people who don't have good access to the electronic side, we're also getting a whole new audience of people who weren't necessarily tracking local government to the same extent that they would have. So that's been really important and kind of fun because we're getting new people that are engaged. It's that 80% of people who maybe don't come to City Hall. They're starting to realize what local government does in a different way. And our whole issues has changed. I mean, it's a totally different world where people are staying home more. And so people who might have, instead of writing us about potholes, they're instead now talking to us about what their neighbors are up to. People are paying attention to different things, and there's been some odd outcomes due to that, but also some really positive interactions on issues where people might not have realized there are important things that they should be tracking.
That's so cool to hear you talk about that. And the new audience, our research has shown that during the pandemic, trust in local government has actually increased. And you can expect and probably understand the differentials between local government, state government, and federal government. But it's really nice to hear you kind of verify the fact that local government residents are now plugging in a little bit more because they have the access to the technology and the availability of being connected. Adam, just real quickly, you've got a lot of committees and commissions that are working on issues, a lot out of your department. Has that fed into, or how does that play into helping Duluth with the sense of community?
It's a little daunting from a staffing perspective because we have so many. Actually, during the pandemic, we originated a new commission, a new African Heritage Commission, and that has been an interesting process, allowing this new commission to start up and go through the growing pains of what it means to establish a commission and a work plan with people who have never had the chance to meet in person and actually establish a rapport with one another. I think it's really useful. It's important, and we have, again, as I said about the outreach to community members, we need to have redundancy with our commissions. We've recognized that, and we've tried to really make sure that that's happening. Not an easy thing to achieve. When you have a range of people working on a pretty wide variety of different and disparate topics, but still making sure some of those core city messages are getting through to all the boards and commissions. We've had to continuously emphasize, thank you for your willingness to bear with us as we do this all electronically, because there are commission members who are quite fed up with it. Some of our older commission members who are just, at the end of wanting to do this stuff electronically. And I get it. Like it's tough. So.
Yeah, this process, if nothing else, has kept us all humble, hasn't it?
Yeah, right.
Thanks, Adam. Okay, let's just move on. I'll come back to Opal. Can you talk about how engagement has influenced Novi's success in maintaining its sense of community?
Yeah, without repeating a lot of stuff that Adam already touched on, I think it's very similar across the lines of how do you make that shift, and you're gaining new members that you're communicating with, and you don't want to lose the old way. And let's face it, humans, we're relational. I mean, we were designed that way. We've operated like that for thousands of years in our own little tribes or clans that turned into villages and communities. And it's all because we're relational and we thrive on that relation. Some of the challenges we have is by isolating people, you're actually creating issues that we didn't have to deal with before, because there is none of that interaction that people are used to, and they don't even realize how used to it they are. So we tried to come up with different ways to do it that were fun, engaging. Fortunately, as I said, we were pretty well prepped with our IT team. We had the technology to do some different things. So responding to the remote meetings, where the first one may have been clunky, they've been rather smooth since then as far as interacting with the public, still having public there. We actually had some committees ongoing that we kept going, such as a road committee to study some road issues we're working on. And we were able to keep that going with the public, which was really nice to see. Also, we didn't know we had a public hearing on a park we're developing, and we needed public input. And we said, I don't know if anyone's going to show up. Let's post it that we're having it only online, and it's via Zoom. And, we had over 35 people attend and give their input and feedback, which was really good to see how people have adapted, and they still want to communicate. But some of our popular programs were the quick updates. So we do after a city council meeting, we have something called After the Gavel that we roll out. And it's just a couple minute, 3-4 minute cap of what happened at the last city council meeting by somebody in my office, either myself or my assistant or the assistant too, gets in front of the camera and just talks about the council meeting and the highlights. And a lot of people like that they could get a short video on what's going on in the community. But our largest challenge is still trying to figure out how we do that communication, because every year we do have big events here at the Civic Center where we engage with our people. And that's so important for them to see our different departments, what they do, and meet face to face in a very comfortable environment, and even light up the night things where we have 8,000 people come to our Civic Center, to light up a Christmas tree, and or our spring palooza when everyone wants to get outside after the winter. And, we have another 6,000-7,000 people, families just show up, and we have all types of games and things for them to do. And it's a really good community event, and we can't do that. So we have to reinvent some of those. And actually we're doing that now, and we're going out to neighborhood parks. It's taking more staff time to do because we want to keep events smaller, but our staff misses that too, that interaction with people. Unlike what Adam was explaining, we actually stayed open. I think we actually closed the Civic Center for a very short period of time But we did shift most of our services online. So it gave people the opportunity to go online. We have a nice foyer in our civic center that has double doors. Think of a movie airtight sections before you go submersible. So we could sequester, people could drop off plans there to be picked up and vice versa. So staff was very creative in doing that. So we kept those lines of communication that were so essential to keep everything running. But our team just didn't miss a beat. They just kept going, and we adapted, we're innovative, and we've overcome a lot of things that we didn't even know existed.
Yeah, that makes sense. Did Pete, do you have any perspective? Do you think overall the levels of engagement increased, or did you notice a change in terms of the number of residents that were engaging on things that were going on?
Well, similar to what was mentioned before, people were noticing things they didn't see before. they were sentenced to their homes, and when people are in a different environment, even though you live there, most adults spend more time at work than they spend out at their home. But when you're at home looking at your four walls, well, okay, maybe now you're watching what the neighbor's doing, or oh, wow, I didn't know they've got an overgrown tree in my yard. So they start finding other things to keep them busy and occupied and make the world a better place. So you get all kinds of new friends that way. But I think for the most part, it was all very positive, because people do care about other people, and they do positive things, and how can they help along that nature. But goes back to, you can't do it when the pandemic hits. You can't do it when the tornado hits. You can't do it when X, Y, or Z happens. You have to build these relationships over time. Our police department, well, it's pretty famous for their community policing. It didn't happen overnight. It's been 25 years, 30 years in the workings to get to where we are, where our police officers are in the neighborhoods and the kids know them by name. They high five them when they go down the street, and then you watch a lot of stuff on these other, on the national news. How can that happen? And you don't see that here. And like I say, I'm blessed to run a great community that has been working on that long before I got here, and it pays off in spades when something does happen, because you already have those trust buckets full.
That's very well stated. And you're right. It is a relationship business, isn't it? The more that you can generate those trusting relationships, the more context you give people around the work that local government does, the value that it brings. So that you said that very, very well. Thank you. Opal, I'd like to come back to you and have you talk a little bit more about how engagement plays into your success in maintaining your sense of community in Lancaster.
One of the things I said earlier is that broadband was an issue. So you got firsthand experience that access can be challenging. Even during council meetings, we've had that happen. So it's truly can be challenging in our area. And so one of the things our state's picked up with the legislature this year is access, because the largest portion of Texas is rural. So that's a real issue for us. But as it relates to engagement, one of the things we found is it wasn't just COVID. We had social justice issues. Lancaster community is 80% minority with African-American and Hispanic. And what we saw was a lot of engagement. It had to be more outdoor, but it was more neighborhood focused, where you had neighbors helping neighbors or engaging. Whereas every year we have National Night Out, and we hardly ever see the neighbors come out and engage with one another. But during this pandemic and during what we saw with the social justice issues, neighbors were actually out talking to one another, engaging with one another, helping if someone was sick, being that runner to the store to go grab things and put on the doorstep for folks. And so for us as a city, it was nice to be able to kind of get feedback and witness some of those things. A lot of us actually live in the community. So to personally witness some of those things, our city council members tapped into their networks. So it wasn't just when they're running for election, right? They have their network. They actually utilize those networks to engage and make sure the community information was being shared once things began to shut down even more. we were also able to utilize a lot of the social service organizations because they have their networks. And so being able to plug in, it literally was, we got to see the community as one come together in small micro communities. And that was really powerful because neighborhoods started to see, we would share things on social media about what this subdivision was doing, about what that subdivision was doing. And we found that the subdivision started sharing more and more information with us about, hey, well, we're doing this. And look at how many of our people are out and they were doing it correctly, which was nice to see. They were social distancing. They were wearing their face coverings. They were doing all of the things that we were putting out in our messaging. And so we felt like we really had the opportunity to see more of the community come together. I'm excited to see when we are, vaccinated and able to get together again in some sense, what our community events will look like now. Because before you'd have a community event, you may see, a large portion of this part of the city or that part of the city. And I think now I'm excited because I'm optimistic that we'll see the community as a whole even more so begin to come together following this.
That is so great to hear from you. You've already talked about how you've engaged your community. I love hearing about how you've engaged at the neighborhood level and just the value of the connectedness that people already feel at that level, but being able to pull all that stuff together. I'm kind of curious, you just became an All-American city in 2019. So as you were coming into the pandemic, you already had accomplished something that is people want to be very proud about. And did that have an impact on essentially the level of community capital that you could take advantage of as you were struggling and being challenged by things related to the pandemic?
It was, because it goes back to those relationships and having those relationships already established, and people having a sense of pride about the community and wanting to see that carried forward. If you saw someone, we saw a lot, particularly with social media and other outlets. If people saw someone doing something that was wrong, it was, interesting and yet sometimes a little troubling. They would go, well, that's not what an All-American City resident would do, or that's not how. And so we're kind of like, oh, well, please don't tag that with us. But it was, it was a sense of pride, and people had that sense of ownership and wanting things better. Like any community, you have a segment of your population that doesn't. But the largest majority of our folks were saying, hey, no, look, we've made this accomplishment and brought this back to our community. Let's elevate it and show everyone around us what that looks like.
That's so cool to hear. Congratulations. That's very nice. Opal, can you talk about the tools that Lancaster is using to help measure feedback from a resident's perspective?
We've used a lot of survey tools. We were already involved with Zen City. So that was one, and they use the social media platform to kind of track things. So we have Survey Monkey. Every kind of one of those little tools that we kind of had just kind of hidden away. We're recognizing and realizing, to reach an older population, this is what works, right? So we still use the water bill mailing that, share your feedback that way. And believe it or not, my senior citizens, when they mail back their water bill or they drop it in that drop box, they have filled out that little paper form and dropped it in there with it. But with our younger population, them being able to share their thoughts on Instagram or TikTok, believe it or not, I was like, but they made little videos and putting comments on videos. I'm like, okay, as a manager, I was quite nervous about it, to be really honest. But it was it was a way that we were getting feedback that our residents were going, hey, yeah, we're happy to see that you guys aren't a bunch of stiff shirts, right? And that you really are wanting to allow us to be more engaged and involved. We do annually, we do a citywide survey, and we utilize Survey Monkey and incorporate that into our website and some other ways. And that's people fill that out. I've been surprised. We've actually got the highest number of people participating in city surveys during this environment than we ever had. I've been with the city for 18 years, and I've never seen as many people comment and share feedback. We've never had as many people involved. I think it was Adam who said actually attending our council meetings. But I think the virtual environment has created an opportunity that they may not have had. You have a lot of working parents. And so when they get home from work or picking the kids up from school or soccer practice or basketball practice or ballet or dance, it's like get a meal prepared, do homework, and we don't have time for anything else. But now not having to come out, another tool that we've been able to measure and get feedback is during those public comment sections on our council meetings. Where that's good and bad, as a manager, but we're getting the feedback. And I think at the end of the day, the feedback is what's valuable, important, because you can either make, informed, intelligent decisions about things that need to change, or you recognize that, there's just, some discontentment regarding particular situations. So our website's been really valuable to us. Our IT department, I know Pete said that, but our technology team has been the absolute best. One of the smallest in the city, but one of the biggest in terms of what they've been able to do for us. And just monitoring how many people are clicking that page, how long are they staying on that page? What is the most pulled or researched thing from a particular source or site? So that's been really another way that we've been measuring the engagement and the involvement from our community.
It's great. It's really nice to hear how you have really taken advantage of a whole variety of different mechanisms to get resident feedback. So congratulations on that. Pete, can you talk about the tools that you're using in Novi to get resident input on how you're measuring your performance?
Yeah, I think one of the important things, at least for me, and it's not technology driven at all, but as a representative form of governance that we run, I think it's important to lean on those elected officials. In Novi, we have 7 elected officials who get together every other week to make those policy decisions. And this just reinforces the representative form of government. They still have contact with people who they represent in the community. So making sure that we in management listen to them because they were elected to make those decisions. Sometimes we get too far ahead of ourselves and say, okay, we did a survey monkey that was mentioned, or we found this on this social media platform. Those are voices, and listening to voices is good, unless they're in your own head, and then people question me. But to hear the voices is good, but that when we're running a successful organization, we have to look to the board of directors or the elected board who were actually voted and empowered to make decisions for the masses. And it goes back to before pandemic, is you might get 4 people come from a neighborhood to complain that we're moving forward on X, Y, or Z, and a council can shift their view based on those 4 people. Now, we're a small community, we're under 70,000 people, but 4 people don't represent the rest of the city in what's going on. And I'm real fortunate that our council understands that, and they represent a larger body. So I'd go back to basics and remind everybody that it is that elected board that us on the inside have to listen to. Not the only voice to listen to, but it is a voice to listen to. Then we look at external things. We have we do a lot of accreditation things, both statewide and national. Our police department actually just went through its reaccreditation at CALIA on the national level, which is considered the gold standard for police departments and your policies and making sure you're best in class and you have to defend everything you do. And but getting somebody, a person from the outside looking at you and saying, what are you doing? Because that includes interaction with public. So everything we do on a daily basis is inspected and verified. And the same thing you do with your Department of Public Works. Our Parks Department is one of, I believe, only 4 communities in Michigan that is a nationally accredited park division. So we do things like that on the outside to make sure a third party is looking at what we do and how we communicate. And then the third is you do have to check with the people. And we do so, and this is not a paid endorsement of any sort, but we use POLCO to every other year they come to our community and survey the people. and it's a scientific survey, and we all know what that means is it's verifiable, it's repeatable within a certain percentile, and we get that back. And having done that over the last 16 years, you can watch trends. You can see where you're performing well and where you might need a little bit more focus. So I think using that is a good tool. We don't do it every year. We do it every other year. And I think that gives us a good long-term gauge versus the short-term knee-jerk, they're feeling this way, do this. And I think that's helped us. And I think that then the final way, I won't eat up everyone else's time. I think the final way is when you're recognized. There are several magazines out there that recognize. I think we were just named one of the 10 best cities just this week in 10 best communities for people to live in or raise a family. Earlier this year, I just have to look it up here, Entrepreneurial Magazine. It basically named us the #2 city in the U.S. for essential city for the future of American innovation. It's those outside entities again that are looking for quality, and when they hit on you and they continue to mention you. Of the school districts, we have several school districts in Novi, and 2 of the school districts, Novi schools and Northville schools, Novi is #1 in the state this year. Northville is #2. So it's those outside sources that keep coming back to you and saying, "Hey, you're doing okay." It's not something you look for or you plan for, but I do think it does mean you are listening to people, you are listening to your different constituents and partners to build a successful community.
And you mentioned it earlier, Pete. I mean, you've been building this over time. This is a long project in process. I always tell people that engagement can't be a project. It actually has to be an organizational value, because you can't just do it today and not do it tomorrow. But as I'm thinking about all of the panelists today, all of you come from communities where people are proud to live in your communities for a variety of different reasons. And that is just so true, that people like to be they like to be around winning teams, right? And they want to be involved with the good action. And so very well stated. And then you got your accreditation process and monitoring your performance. That's the way that you can demonstrate in real terms how your performance is over time, and to be able to react and inform your elected bodies about, okay, we're going up in this category or we're going down in this category. And then the elected bodies can take that information, react to it however is appropriate, and make some decisions around it. So thank you for that. That was very well stated. Appreciate that. Adam, what tools are you using in Duluth for measuring resident feedback?
Well, it's hard to add on everything Pete and Opal have said. I think all those things are right. Certainly relying on elected officials. We've tried to push our boards and commissions, who are, some of whom are making decisions, some of whom are just advisory to our elected officials. But we want all those people who are out in the community having those conversations and making sure that our feedback loops are resilient, which is a hard thing to achieve. We've been relying on social media. I think that's absolutely right. Opal's description of that is, it's consistent with what we're experiencing, and relying on things like that can be a little unusual. You can get some sort of unexpected twists and turns when you're on social media. And, I know if someone from our attorney's office was on, they'd have all kinds of concerns about data practices and security and things of that nature when it comes to that type of feedback mechanism, because it's something that people pay attention to. So those are the most frequent. We don't do an annual survey. We don't have a regular survey tool that we use other than SurveyMonkey. And so that's an area where I'd say an area that we have a need for some growth and some improvement. And we I think did a survey related to a project earlier this year where it was just that fairly simplistic, non-scientific outreach using the internet. And then we did some mailings and we gave people, postage paid envelopes. Please fill out this survey, return it to us. And somebody, I don't know who it was, somebody took one of those copies of the survey. They made about 20 or 30 copies of it and filled it out. And we could tell it was different pens, but the same handwriting. They weren't asking multiple people to, and these were people who were very opposed to the policy initiative, amplifying their voice in a different way. And so, there are risks with different tools. We're lucky, I think, that we have some fairly recent policy direction that's strong enough, and we have retained a level of cohesion amongst our elected officials that for now, in the short term, we can rely on outcomes that are based on specific policy initiatives that are things we've been working on or been told we should be working on. And that's a good feedback mechanism. It means you're achieving something, but I think it's got a shelf life that's not indefinite. It is going to have to be updated. There is a need to improve on that, and that's something that we'll need to be talking about in our downtown area. That's an important one for us that actually just talking about this week, where we're doing something with our downtown group, and it's going to be via SurveyMonkey. It's a non-scientific effort. And so I think there are opportunities to improve on that, and it's something that we are paying attention to.
And that's with all of the development work that's going on in Duluth, I would suspect that trying to find those vehicles for getting resident feedback on just designing the project throughout the whole development phase becomes a process. And so it's interesting to have you kind of share with us how you're dealing with that from a just a day-to-day kind of standpoint on your outreach. Yeah. Thank you. This has been great. Just such great perspectives. I really appreciate everybody's thoughts. This would be the time if you have some questions or you want to exchange any thoughts between each other, go ahead and jump into it. Anybody want to lead off anything?
I'll jump in since I'm the senior, obviously, if you haven't guessed. I really want to encourage the not only the two panelists, but the any other community is looking at this is to start now with a consistent message, a consistent measuring stick, if you will, and doing things like surveys. If you're doing a survey, it's great to do a survey, but what are you measuring it against? Is it a blip on the radar? Is it what's happening currently on social media or nationally or internationally? Or are you measuring something that you can measure and see, are we making progress in this area? And the total opposite of that, because that's scientific, can be measured, can be validated. That's all good stuff versus the SurveyMonkey stuff, which is good and it's information, but is similar to SurveyMonkey, but maybe a little better is we've done it in law enforcement before this hit, and it continues today, but we have a blue card that we send out. There's a percentage of every one of our contacts, we send them a blue card to fill out and send back in. How are we doing? We started that with our fire department as well. But it's just a different way to capture a different segment of the population of what's going on. And sometimes it's those little things where you'll find out nuggets of information. And you have that pulse of what's going on in the community before you need it.
Thanks, Pete. And the blue card's been pretty successful?
Very successful. And I stole it from another community I was in before I came to Novi. So it's been, what you're doing is, when these negative issues come up, and they'll always come up because guess what? We're dealing with humans. And when they come up, you have to have the community's trust. You have to have enough successes in one bucket that if it gets drained by one incident or something that's maybe not even in your community that's happening and get drugged down by it, you have to build up those trusts. So by having all this information available, that out of the several thousand contacts that we have, we had no complaints last year, or we had 7 complaints about force to resistance, and none of them were substantiated. Having that information, not having to go back and create it, is really crucial. And while it's part of the accreditation process, some of those that you don't have to, you're not being reactive or it looks like you're defensive. We're getting on offense, and we're trying to find out. We want to know where our weak points are so we can make them stronger. And I found it very successful just asking people, how are we doing?
Yep. Yeah, thanks, Pete. Really appreciate that. Adam, Opal, anything?
Well, I kind of have a stop. I need to get to something at 12:15, I think. But I am curious to know, Opal and Pete, generally, one of the things that we experience in Duluth is our politics are fairly predictable. But in our region, they are not as predictable. And that plays into, sort of how we have feedback mechanisms locally, as well as Duluth being a regional center and people coming here and having lots of opinions that are maybe not necessarily people who also live here. I'm curious how that manifests itself in your communities, and if you have any thoughts, in particular, how that relates to like the city county stuff that that we experience here locally.
So what I would say for us is the regional impacts are felt. However, some of the things that Pete was touching on are really valuable and important. But I also recognize, and what we look at is policies and procedures, through all the accreditations, because we do those things and they're great. But you also have to look at those policies and procedures and when they were established and under what conditions they were established, and how do you make sure that there's no unintentional biases that are built in. And so really taking a hard look and engaging with your residents, those relationships I go back to at the very beginning are so invaluable, because having relationships, there's a level of trust that will come from relationship. Forget what happened, whether it happened in your community or in another state or the community across the highway. When you have those relationships, there's a level of trust that I don't believe that this person would intentionally do anything. So there must have been something else, or there were other mitigating circumstances. And so those relationships have really been invaluable when it comes to what's happening in my neighboring community. Because, if some policy passes across the highway, then, my policy members or members of our community will start talking to those policy members and asking those kinds of questions. But because of the relationships, there's a lot more opportunity to truly be heard and have value in what's taking place.
Yeah, thanks. Let me kind of jump in on the next segment just to kind of get this wrapped up.
And Matt, I am going to hop off. So I want to thank Pete and Opal. Really nice to meet you both. And Matt, thank you for the opportunity to do this.
Thank you, Adam, for joining us.
Nice to meet you, Adam. I'll look you up when I get in Duluth.
Please do. Thanks.
You all have identified some just really valuable things. I love the comments about the value of being ahead of the storm and getting that engagement. I mean, Novi is a great example of decades of work and focused effort on connecting and building that trust level, so that when you do hit a storm, you've got something to draw upon and you've got a relationship that's already established. That, I think, just came through loud and clear. But it also, as Opal has pointed out, you need to have those connections in the community on an ongoing basis. And there's a lot of partners, schools, churches, civic groups that you can all grab onto to help build that relationship with the broader community and maintain that overall sense of community. I think we all value the notion of the kind of new and emerging use of technology and the value that plays, especially as it helps to build participation in a different way and a different audience. All of it is geared towards maintaining the sense of community and helping your elected folks do their job that they were elected to do in a representative kind of a way. Your technology allows you to get data that you otherwise haven't been able to get in the past. And it's in an organized way, and in our case, a verified way. And having the ability to then be able to put that into a program where you can track your performance over time. All of this was just really super, and I really thank you for all of the thoughts that you shared. So let me just kind of wrap this up. I'm going to be following up with you. I'll give you all the information for all of the panelists, and so that you can connect with each other on any issues or any questions that you might have. We do these sessions every week, and so every Thursday, we interview 3 local government leaders. Every Tuesday, we actually interview law enforcement leadership. So if you're aware or know people that would want to participate in this style of conversation, I would welcome you to get them in connection with me so that we can get them scheduled. We're going to be this is being recorded, and so we're going to be actually sharing this information and giving you highlight segments that we'll publish on LinkedIn. And because it's all about sharing perspectives, we would certainly hope that all of you will share it within your networks on LinkedIn as well. And then I'll give you a call in the next several days and get your feedback on ways that we can improve this dialogue. This is about 4 or 5 months old, and we're interested in improving this. This was just an outstanding conversation, just lots of good stuff that I think local community leaders are going to be able to benefit from. So really appreciate you spending the time. You're doing outstanding work. It's so much fun to listen to your successes, and it does involve some good leadership. So congratulations to that. But thank you for spending the last hour and a little bit with me.